Hi, folks. Welcome to the very first America Unfiltered deep dive video cast. America Unfiltered is a joint project of the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin and EA WorldView. You can get to it through either the Clinton Institute website or through EA. It'll be a series of analyses, podcasts, and videocasts like this one to strip away all the spin, the misinformation, disinformation, and to try to get to the facts and some kind of understanding about what is happening in America, especially in these critical times. So for the first podcast, we're going to talk about the 21st Century Medicine Show. What's that? Well, it involves Donald Trump. It involves doctors on Fox TV. There's a billionaire. There's a Bitcoin investor. And it's all around a supposed wonder drug to deal with coronavirus. A wonder drug called hydroxylchloroquine. Now, first of all, let's set out some basic information before asking how this wonder drug story all developed to the point where a president of the United States could be touting this untested treatment, which has never been verified in any clinical trials, which has not had a peer-reviewed study, but which this man in the White House, defying his medical advisors, will say is the treatment that can solve the first pandemic that the world has faced in more than a century. Hydroxychloroquine is an antimalarial drug, but it is also used in various forms to deal with lupus and to deal with rheumatoid arthritis. It has been around for some time, but until very recently, until February to be exact, there was no idea that it would be used possibly for coronavirus. And then Donald Trump, well, actually, it's more than Donald Trump. Some other folks seized upon it. But they seized upon it despite the fact that in addition to being untested, there are very serious side effects to hydroxychloroquine if it's used in significant quantities or if it's used with other drugs, say like azithromycin, Z-Max. Many side effects are listed, but amongst the most serious are vision impairment and vision loss, and arrhythmia, disruption of the heart rate that can lead to death. In small quantities, for example, in treating lupus, these side effects have not been seen to be so significant. But in larger doses and in sustained doses, in other words, the type of doses and time that would be needed for retreatment of coronavirus, then the risk increased substantially. And indeed, in recent days, the warnings of the American Medical Society, the warnings of other medical groups, the warning of the White House medical advisors, such as Anthony Fauci, have been borne out in a study, a multicultural study, that has talked about this increased rate of cardiac arrest. So if it has these side effects, if it's not tested, why was it touted as a treatment? Step up first, Marc Siegel. And Marc Siegel is a doctor who is based in New York City, but he's most prominent as a pundit. And by a pundit, I mean he goes on Fox TV quite often and suddenly issues opinions on the medical issue of the day. He's been around for some time, but he really starts to pick up in the coronavirus around early March. He shows up on March the 6th in a video in which he says that the World Trade Health Organization is being alarmist, is basically creating hysteria over this thing called coronavirus, and says it's no worse than the flu. A week later, he would actually say on March 13th, well, in fact, it is no different from the flu. A bit of it, or flu is very different, is not like coronavirus. A sudden shift in only 7 days, but one that he gets away with because very quickly our story moves on. It moves on because of the background of a study in France by a doctor named Didier Raoult. Now, this study in Marseille only had about 20 patients that it was reported. And initially, Raoult said, 100% of them basically got better with the treatment of hydrochloroquine with another drug, with azithromycin. He was reporting a 100% success rate. He eventually would have a paper published in a journal about it. But in fact, there are serious questions. Experts have noticed that there's no control group over the study. And indeed, there had been accusations leveled that Raoul hid those patients who didn't get better. Those who didn't get better were simply excluded from the study. A few of them died. Some of them went home, and we don't know what their ultimate fate was. The questions are so significant over this study that the journal which published it is now thinking of withdrawing it. But on March the 14th, talking to Judge Janine Pirro, Marc Siegel wasn't mentioning those questions. Instead, he was looking at that French study and also some reports of Chinese studies, again without control groups, again that weren't being peer-reviewed. But he said, you know what, I've got breaking news for you. No one else is talking about this. In fact, some people were, but we'll leave that to the side. No one else is talking about this. South Korea is trying chloroquine and zinc. And there's the chloroquine is under this brand name. It's been used for arthritis by the French company Sanofi under the brand name of Plaquenil. This is a wonderful drug. It looks quite promising. It's coming down the pipe rapidly in the next few weeks. 2 days later, on March 16th, Marc Siegel appears in the morning on Donald Trump's favorite program, Fox and Friends. And he again touts the possibility that there might be this new treatment for coronavirus. And he's not the only one that Fox is pushing by March the 16th. Later in the day, well, step up and meet the Bitcoin speculator, a man named Gregory Rigano. Now, Gregory Rigano is an attorney. He's based on Long Island, but he is best noted for, in fact, trying to make a lot of money as being a Bitcoin investor. However, in mid-March, the nature of the game changes because Rigano, along with a co-author, publishes a Google document which claims to be a study of hydroxylchloroquine's effectiveness with dealing with coronavirus. And he says that this is a study which has been carried out in conjunction with Stanford University, where he claims to be an associate, with the University of Alabama Birmingham Medical Center, and with the National Academy of Sciences. None of that was true. Gregory Rigano has no position with Stanford University. He had not been involved with the University of Alabama Birmingham or the National Academy of Sciences. These organizations asked him to cease and desist, saying that they were involved with this supposed study that was a Google document. And that was eventually turned into a journal article alongside the Marseille doctor, Didier Raoult. Again, none of these questions mattered. The fact that this actually wasn't a real scientific study that had not been carried out with clinical trials. When Gregory Rigano shows up on the afternoon of, or evening of March 16th on a Fox TV program, and then 2 days later, on February 18th, on the primetime program of Tucker Carlson, where Carlson gives him a basically softball interview, and Rigano, although appearing a bit scrambled through all of this, at the end is touted as the person who may deliver the drug to deal with coronavirus. There are others, like, well, meet Dr. Oz, Dr. Mehmet Oz, Fox TV doctor who has been criticized by medics for example, promoting fake weight loss treatments, promoting root extract to cure the common cold, but continues to appear as Fox's regular medical correspondent. And he follows up these appearances by Marc Siegel and Gregory Rigano by saying this indeed is the drug that can deal with coronavirus very, very quickly, to the point where he is placed into a town hall meeting asking Vice President Mike Pence and Donald Trump about this supposed treatment, assuring Fox viewers by March the 25th that, in fact, he is now talking to the White House. He's indeed talking to Trump officials to tell them how effective hydroxylchloroquine could be. Now, at this point in our story, it could be a simple Trump watch Fox TV, where a lot of his favorite programs are, and he latches onto the idea of the wonder drug. But that is only part of our story. Meet Larry Ellison, one of the richest men in the world that you may never have heard of. Now, Larry Ellison founded Oracle, the software company, in the late 1970s, and he parlayed that into a multi-billion-dollar company, indeed to the point where Larry Ellison is worth $59 billion. the fifth richest man in the world, according to some estimates. He stepped down as chief executive officer in 2014 of Oracle, and he decided to devote himself, for example, to health and well-being projects. He set up supposed centers that would deal with life-extending treatments, poured hundreds of millions of dollars into them, achieved very few results, according to those who have scientifically evaluated them, but promotes himself as this type of guru who can use data, who can use information to give us well-being. A 21st century mystic, as it were, but using, well, the internet and all the power behind the internet to solve the world's illnesses and depressions. In the week beginning March 16th, Larry Ellison approached Donald Trump. He spoke to Donald Trump about this thing, hydroxylchloroquine, and said, Mr. President, or Mr. Trump, or Donald, what are you doing about this? One more significant fact. Why did Larry Ellison get access to Donald Trump in the week beginning March 16th? Well, it isn't just because he's the world's fifth richest man. It isn't because he was known for Oracle technologies. And it certainly wasn't because of his health and well-being guru status. Larry Ellison in mid-February hosted a fundraiser for Donald Trump, who is seeking re-election in 2020, that raised $7 million within hours. That gets you doors open, phone lines open. And Ellison used it for, what are you doing about this, Donald? By the end of the day, Donald Trump had sent out a series of messages across government agencies asking what was being done by hydroxychloroquine. Fox TV, the Bitcoin speculator, and the billionaire. By March 18th, there was a meeting. It involved the top medical officials, the top health officials. Health Secretary Alex Azar was there. So was the head of the Food and Drug Administration, Stephen Hahn. So was Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the of the Institute dealing with infectious diseases, who's become prominent in the White House effort against coronavirus. Trump made his pitch for hydroxychloroquine. Indeed, he had actually given a teaser for it on Twitter, which said, going to have big news after this meeting, hoping, in fact, that he could probably go forward after the meeting and announce, I found the wonder cure. The only problem is that the meeting held Trump back. Quite rightly, Fauci, Stephen Hahn, the Food and Drug Administration official, Stephen Hahn, and others said, we have no clinical trials that prove the effectiveness of this. The Marseille, France study is not a clinical trial which was peer-reviewed. It, in fact, did not have a control group. In other words, they give all the rational, medical, clinical reasons why you should be cautious about proceeding. And it appears on March 18th that Trump is held back. He doesn't go forward and give this briefing to announce the cure. He doesn't do it on March 18th. He waits until March 19th. 24 hours later, at the White House coronavirus briefing, Donald Trump stands up and says that the Food and Drug Administration has approved hydroxychloroquine as a treatment. That is false. It still is false. The FDA's approval proceedings is rigorous, takes a great deal of time, even in an emergency situation like coronavirus, and there was no trials for which the FDA to consider and grant approval. There was nothing there, in other words. But Stephen Hahn had to be cautious. Stephen Hahn had to stand up and he had to not directly contradict Trump, but to say, well, we'll look into the matter. We'll consider the matter. In other words, by completely running roughshod over the medical advice, by using that forum, that briefing, that moment on TV, Trump had changed the nature of the game. By the 21st of March, the Center for Diseases Control, which is supposed to oversee the response to an epidemic, to what is now a pandemic, was now putting out guidance on his website that said that hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin, Zmax, was now a treatment, a possible treatment for coronavirus, even though there was no medical status for this. There was nothing to base this on. In other words, the CDC had been pressured into putting out that statement, which effectively endorsed Trump's view this could be the wonder drug that we're all looking for. This continued through March with, for example, meet Rudy Giuliani. Now, you may remember Rudy Giuliani from his past appearances as New York City mayor, as a failed candidate for president, and more recently, as an attempted fixer for Donald Trump. A fixer who was so, ineffectual at fixing that he almost wound up getting Trump thrown out of office and did get Trump impeached over the Ukraine scandal. Trying to recover a bit from the Trump-Ukraine affair, Rudy Giuliani reinserts himself by calling up Donald Trump, by saying to Trump on several occasions, yeah, you got it. You should try these treatments for coronavirus. You should try this hydroxychloroquine and this blood plasma treatment. This will get you the credit as the person who solved this pandemic. Yet another voice in Trump's ear. Meanwhile, Dr. Oz, Marc Siegel continue on Fox TV. They are being promoted by hosts such as Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, who dedicate dozens of mentions to hydroxychloroquine. Indeed, the vast majority of references to hydroxychloroquine in the American media from mid-March onwards is on Fox TV, and almost all of the mentions of hydroxychloroquine on Fox are positive, in contrast to a more neutral or even questioning tone taken by other television outlets. For example, Dr. Oz went on in March 23rd and said, well, I'm going to tell you that this treatment, it might not be proven, but the data is so strong, remember, based only on a suspect French study and limited claims coming out of China. The data is so strong that Americans are going to start taking it anyway. So you can actually start the clinical trials, and meanwhile, people can start treating themselves. By March 26th, there is an outfit called Job Creators Network, which provides, it's called dark money. It provides money which does not have to be accountable to federal election authorities, to any other federal agency. As a nonprofit, it gives money to Republicans who are running for office. It gives money to organizations that support Donald Trump, and it launches a petition. Why is this significant? Well, it's not just because it gives money to Republicans. Job Creators Network is the child of a billionaire named Bernard Marcus. You may know him as the co-founder of Home Depot. Now, given that Bernard Marcus spent more than $7 million of his money to elect Trump in 2016, and so that he's going to spend, a good chunk of his fortune to re-elect Trump in 2020, Job Creators Network's post gets a bit of attention. What do they say? Well, why not try hydroxychloroquine? Oh, one more fact about the Job Creators Network. It receives funding from the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. Yeah, that's a drug industry trade organization that includes leading manufacturers, including makers of hydroxychloroquine like Novartis, Teva Pharmaceuticals, and Bayer. Yeah. Now, there's other stories that are out there that perhaps some of these Republican donors, some of these billionaires might have stock in these companies, and they might have motive as well. It's been mentioned as even that Donald Trump, through the Trump Organization, through mutual funds, also has a small share, for example, in the French pharmaceutical company Sanofi, which makes, may we remind ourselves, hydroxychloroquine under the trade name Plaquenil. But it's not necessary here to draw up a conspiracy that this all was to make loads of money through the pharmaceutical drug companies. Because by early April, We're talking about that potent combination of television, the doctors, and Trump's personal network, the billionaires, Rudy Giuliani, supplemented by meet Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro is a very ultra-conservative economist. In fact, he's a protectionist. He's up until now, he's been most noted for the real policy, which is to cut involvement in international trade organizations, to go after China and bash it in a trade war. In other words, as an American firster, it's an American alone position that he takes. We don't need international trade to stand tall. But Peter Navarro takes on another role in January and February. He gets very worried that if the administration doesn't act, up to 500,000 Americans will die. A sentiment I have some degree of agreement with, given Trump's denial that coronavirus existed at that point. But Peter Navarro's warning, as it were, in part is based by the fact that he thinks China, in a way, has sort of exported the virus to undermine America. In other words, even considering the notion that this was, yes, the virus created in a lab. By March, April, as the administration is actually purportedly doing something, Navarro takes a different tack. Navarro takes the tack which is, well, now those 500,000 Americans who might have died from the virus will be saved by hydroxylchloroquine. Peter Navarro has no medical training. He has no training in pharmaceuticals. But on April the 4th, a week ago, he steps into a meeting which also includes Dr. Anthony Fauci, a meeting of the coronavirus task force. Now, Navarro is not supposed to be a central participant in this meeting. He's off to the side in the room. He's listening as there are updates from Stephen Hahn, the Food and Drug Administrator, from Robert Redfield of Centers for Diseases Control, and from Fauci about how we still are at a point where we don't really have a treatment for coronavirus. And then Navarro rises, moves to the table, carrying a sheaf of folders, puts the folders down, and says, here's all that documentation that says hydroxychloroquine works. What was that documentation? Right. It was the Marseille study. It was the really untested claims from the Chinese studies. It was the information that had been going round and round and round. But the difference this time is Navarro didn't just present the information, he was shouting. And he was shouting to say, in effect, that Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top epidemiologist in America, was wrong. This dispute was only resolved when Jared Kushner stepped in and said, effectively, yes, Peter, you'll get what you want. In other words, sit down, quiet down. And on the 4th and 5th of April, Donald Trump again touted hydroxychloroquine as being the treatment that would deal with coronavirus. Donald Trump announced that, in fact, whereas the federal emergency stockpile did not have enough ventilators, did not have enough masks, has not had enough personal protective equipment to supply states, is near exhaustion, that stockpile had been able to obtain 29 million hydroxychloroquine tablets, and indeed was seeking millions more, for example, from India. That's right. A good deal of White House effort, when states have been dealing with the emergency of a rising death toll, of intensive care units being overwhelmed, was to try to get these unproven tablets. When journalists tried to ask Anthony Fauci on April the 5th about Trump's approach to hydroxychloroquine, Trump wouldn't let him answer. He stepped in and said, oh, he's answered this question 15 times already. Move on. Fauci earlier on April the 5th, however, had said and had repeated, this is not a cure for which we have clinical trials. There is still only anecdotal evidence. And indeed, in the days after that, we have gotten the trials which have reinforced the actual proven situation with hydroxychloroquine, which is that the side effects can be significant in large doses. But there's reality, and then there's the Fox doctors, the Bitcoin speculators, the billionaires, and Donald Trump. Who you gonna believe? One other small fact that might have missed before we go. On April the 8th, the Center for Diseases Control, which on March 21st had posted the first guidance saying that hydroxylchloroquine could be a treatment for coronavirus, quietly, without fanfare, altered the guidance. Now it said there is no known treatment at this time for coronavirus, although hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin are being tried, which is indeed true, on an emergency basis on patients. So in other words, there is no time, no space for clinical trials here. One doctor in New York put it this way: we're just throwing everything at this and hoping something works, which is why, on an emergency basis, who knows? Maybe hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin will save lives. Maybe the side effects won't be so significant. Maybe, in other words, they can ease coronavirus. But it is one thing to hope, which we should all do in this crisis. It is another to follow delusion. And it is another to be involved in what is not just a 21st century medicine show, but 21st century quackery. It is the quackery of doctors who appear on television and, speaking as pundits, put out claimed information with no scientific basis. It is the quackery of billionaires who style themselves as well-being and health gurus who can somehow become saviors of the world in a pandemic. It is the quackery of the Bitcoin speculators who pose as doctors, who pose as being associated with leading medical centers to give it attention. It is the quackery of a former New York City mayor, a man who has been disgraced by his recent activities, trying to curry a bit of favor with his most, well-known client. And it is the quackery of a US president, the 45th US president, who, driven primarily by his own ego, decides that he will save the world, whatever the science says, whatever the medicine says, whatever common sense says. This has been America Unfiltered's Deep Dive. Thank you all so much for watching. We hope you'll stick with us by going to the Clinton Institute website or the EA website, where we'll have a lot more analyses, podcast, and even possibly coming soon a webinar. For now, take care and be decent to each other.